in bars.
A couple of more kind of easy questions. As somebody who's worked with stars, especially females, in this era of the 1940s, what can you tell me about selling sex in post-World War II America? How did the
Interesting
from a
question.
PR guy's point of view, I mean, what changed after the war in terms of the way that actresses were put out by the studio?
Well, I didn't know how it was before the war. I wasn't involved before the war. It was after the war that I came into this world, and it was just suddenly all these people that I had been a kid watching on the screens were suddenly coming into my life as living, breathing human beings, and it was kind of exciting to be there. You'd be with Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and Marlene Dietrich and Sylvia Sidney and etc. People that I was, Ginger Rogers. Suddenly I was involved with them as personalities and as real people. And to me, it was the culmination of a dream, I suppose. And it just went on from there.
And how were they in real life? How was there any common denominator of like the most dramatically different thing about them?
Well, the most dramatically different thing about them was how dramatically different they were from each other, and the majority of the stars of that period were very much a product of their own stardom, and they what you saw on screen is what you got as much as possible in real life. Now, someone like Janet Leigh was one of the first people that I ever met that was, well, of course, I met Janet. She was just a kid starting out. But she was a real girl, the kind of girl that I used to know when I was in school. And she wasn't a flamboyant, great star. She hadn't perfected the Crawford bit and the Davis bit. She didn't care. She was a different kind of person. And because almost everyone in real life, and as I worked with them and got to know them, were pretty much what you had been led to think they would be from their screen persona.
Right. But when you think of Norma Shearer and Joan Crawford and all of those great women who played those women's roles of the 30s, you don't think of big breasts, you don't think of the sex goddesses.
Well, that depended. You thought of big breasts and the sex goddesses if you were talking about Jean Harlow or Mae West. That was their stock and trade.
That's a good point.
And with Joan Crawford and Betty Davis and Garbo and the rest of them, they had something else that was there.
And Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, very much. Katharine Hepburn very definitely was. But Katharine Hepburn was unlike anybody else on screen, and she continued to be unlike anybody else off screen, and she just was a different character. They all were different.
Do you think
Each of them.
Do you think that people like Janet Leigh and Marilyn Monroe, who was around Janet's age, and Gloria DeHaven, and that group, June Allison, Do you think that they were more oriented to please, to want to be good girls than the Crawfords and certainly the Dietrichs of their predecessors?
Well, I don't know how the Crawfords and the Dietrichs and so forth were when they were the age that Janet was when I first knew her. She was just starting, really. She had a couple of years as a young actress at MGM. Was a very hot young actress because she was so pretty. She was so pretty, and she was so warm, and she was so sweet, and it turned out that she could do a lot of things beyond just looking gorgeous and looking young and fresh and radiant and dewy. But when I met her first, that was her particular stock and trade, and that's
Tell me
what.
about that first meeting.
Well, the first time I met, I was with RKO. I handled all visiting stars for RKO, and at this point, Howard Hughes had taken over at RKO, and Howard Hughes had borrowed, at a great deal of money for the time, probably somewhere over $1 million, had borrowed Janet Leigh from MGM for 2 pictures. And because Howard Hughes, let's face it, he knew a pretty girl when he saw one, and Janet was certainly that. And with very little encouragement from the lady, Mr. Hughes was... anyway, my assignment, if I wanted to take it, and I did or I'd lose my job, was to go and pick up this girl, take her to an interview. She was staying at the Waldorf, and I arrived at the Waldorf, and I called her room. She wasn't there. And I was in a frenzy. My God. I mean, I know Howard Hughes. If I had lost this hot young star, if she had just, I hadn't kept track of her, I forget, goodbye to my job, which was a good job. I liked it. Anyway, I went all over the Waldorf looking for Janet Leigh. And then I finally figured, I've done it, I've goofed. I went back to the Waldorf Tower desk to leave a note for her. Please, when you come back, we were supposed to have met. There, sitting next to the desk, dressed beautifully and like a kid, with her little hands folded in her lap, there was Janet Leigh. She wasn't waiting in her room for me. She was waiting right downstairs at the desk. And, of course, that is so un-movie star. Movie stars don't come and wait and meet you. You pick them up, but you find them and you wait for it. Anyway, Janet she was refreshingly lovely, young, and without any shred of, I am a movie star. There was none of that to Janet.
That's a great story. When you, do you think she was particularly aware of how beautiful she was?
Well, I think she knew that people thought she had something special. She had been, she never went out looking for jobs as a actress or a model or things. People came to her and said, hey, let us sign you. I was just talking to Van Johnson about the first time he met her, when this kid finally was signing her contract at MGM because someone had seen her picture. Norma Shearer had seen her picture and said to MGM, this is a marvelous looking girl, you ought to sign her. She came in to sign her contract. Her name was Jeanette Morrison, and she met this man who was going to star in the first movie in which he was appearing as his leading lady. That was Van Johnson. And Van says, you know, Jeanette, that sounds like Jeanette MacDonald. That sounds too fancy. It isn't right for you. He says, the whole thing, you're kind of a let's call you Janet. And what goes with Janet? He said, you know, Morrison doesn't. Morrison, that's too much of Janet Morrison. That's something more simple. And he said, of course, I got a favorite star of my own. And another lady named Vivien Leigh. And I think that'd be a great name for you. Janet Leigh. That's how she was named.